This story comes from a newsletter called Idle Class, edited by Mallory Sherman, who joins us today to talk about it. Welcome to Writers on Writing. There's a whole genre of work that traffics in aspirational lies, self-help books, seminars by motivational speakers, one-on-one coaching sessions. I personally have wasted thousands of dollars trying to become a better writer, and I know I'm not alone. How does this stuff work? Why are we suckers for it? And how did you come up with such a brilliantly satirical example of it? So, I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that you as a reader of this channel are probably smart and cynical. You've probably heard all the motivational cliches and you recognize the absurdity of some of those miracle cures. But even knowing all that, you and I both find ourselves lured in by the promise of improvement, by the allure of instant expertise. There's a reason for that. When we start writing, especially creative writing, we're often starting from a place of insecurity. We're trying to build up confidence and competence, and we feel vulnerable. And so when someone tells us that they can help us skip the hard work, sidestep the years of practice, learn the rules so that we can immediately break them, we want to believe them. We want to trust them. And scammers like Marcus Lee in this story prey on that vulnerability. So to answer your question, I think there are a couple things that went into creating this story. First, I wanted to capture the tone of those types of seminars. You know, the language, the cadence, the salesmanship. Second, I wanted to include a sense of the desperation that makes these promises so appealing. And finally, I wanted to offer a critique of the fleecing culture of self-improvement without seeming preachy or condescending. It's hard to satirize something when you're being condescending. If you're going to make fun of something, it's best to do it in a way that shows that you understand why it's appealing, what the desire is, that it's fulfilling. Did you consciously model the style of any particular authors or works? The weirdest part of this story is how closely it adheres to the structure of a typical self-help book or seminar. It starts with an inciting incident, the moment of crisis. Then there's the call to action, the decision to attend the event. Then there's the transformation, the promise of becoming a new person, becoming a better person. And then there's the return, which is kind of the anti-climax. The story doesn't end on a triumphant note. It ends with the knowledge that the advice was bogus. It ends with the revelation that the whole thing was just a scam. And yet there's a possibility of growth. So in the story, we have that classic arc of self-discovery that we see in movies and novels and everything else. We just overlay it with greed and absurdity. I like to imagine that the story itself is a kind of self-help book, almost like a rogue entry in the genre that you're parodying. Can you talk a bit more about the process of writing this piece? How did it go from idea to finished product? So this piece was actually born out of an assignment. It was originally intended as a parody of a magical realism story. I wanted to take something fantastical, make it mundane. But as I was researching those seminars and talking to people who had attended them, I realized I didn't want to limit myself to magical realism. I wanted to write something more purely satirical, something closer to a cautionary tale. As far as the process, I tend to work pretty quickly when I'm excited about a piece. This story came together in a few days. I'd written a bunch of other pieces around the same time, and none of them stuck. So this one was kind of my Hail Mary. I submitted it to a literary magazine, and it was rejected immediately. And I think that rejection pushed me to try harder with it. I tightened the language, shifted the tone. I worked on it for a couple more weeks, and then it was accepted by the magazine. How did you balance writing satire with writing in a genre space that is traditionally centered around exploitation and preying on vulnerable people? How did you avoid portraying those people with mockery or disrespect? That's a really good question. I guess it comes down to my perspective. I don't look at the people buying into these schemes as marks. I look at them as victims. These scammers are actively targeting vulnerable people and actively doing harm. To me, it feels wrong to treat those victims with anything less than empathy and respect. As far as the people running the schemes, I don't want to waste my outrage on them. They're scumbags who knowingly profit off of people's pain. It's beneath me. I reserve my contempt for the people who enable these scams, the platforms, the institutions, the societal structures that allow them to thrive. Those are the things I want to call out. In the end, this isn't a story about people who were taken advantage of. It's a story about the people doing the taking. You've mentioned working from personal experience. Do you have any tips for writers who want to write about topics or communities that they aren't a part of? Yeah. I think listening is probably the most important thing. There's a difference between writing about a community and writing for that community. If you're not a member of that community, it's really easy to fall into the trap of representing it poorly or perpetuating harmful stereotypes. So I think it's important to listen to the concerns of members of that community, to hear their stories, to read their writing. And it's equally important to recognize the limits of that experience. We can never fully understand or embody someone else's experience. All we can do is our best to represent it faithfully and respectfully. Do you have any upcoming projects you can tell us about? Right now, I'm finishing up my first novel. It's a satire, like this story, but it's set in the world of competitive dog grooming. It's about a young groomer who sets out to win a prestigious competition and in doing so discovers the dark underbelly of the sport. I'm also continuing to write for magazines and journals. Most recently, I had a piece appear in a literary journal and I have another one coming out soon in a magazine. I mainly write satire. I like the challenge of making serious commentary in a form that's playful and engaging. What's the best piece of writing advice you've ever received and who was it from? This advice comes from a novelist. I think it was during a Q&A at a reading. She was asked about writer's block, which I think is a stupid question. Of course, every writer has writer's block. And her response was, "Stop pretending you're not afraid and just do it anyway." I've carried those words with me for years. Where can we find more of your writing? My stories have appeared in several literary magazines and journals. You can find more of my work on my website and in my newsletter. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.